Right now, a small piece of Russian land is being surrounded piece by piece, and Moscow can barely respond. Something is closing in on Kaliningrad, and once you understand what it is, you will not scroll past this video. Before we go further, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you want to understand global power moves before the news even reports them. And if this video makes you think, send it to one person right now, because they need to see this too. Let's start with the map, because the map explains everything. Look between Poland and Lithuania. You will see a narrow strip of land, barely 100 kilometers wide. This thin corridor is called the Suwalki Gap. It looks like nothing on a map, but military planners on both sides call it one of the most dangerous strips of land on planet Earth. Why? Because on one side of this gap sits Kaliningrad, a piece of Russia that is completely cut off from the rest of Russia. It sits wedged between Poland and Lithuania, hundreds of kilometers away from Moscow, surrounded on every land border by NATO countries. On the other side of the gap sits Belarus, Russia's closest ally. If Russian forces ever seize that narrow strip of land, they would connect Kaliningrad to Belarus, and in doing so, cut off the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, from the rest of NATO completely. That single idea keeps NATO planners awake at night, and that single idea is exactly why Poland has now made its boldest move yet. Let's talk about what Kaliningrad actually is, because most people have never really looked closely at it. This is not just another Russian city, it is home to Russia's Baltic fleet. It hosts advanced radar systems, air defense units, and long-range missile batteries. Western intelligence estimates suggest Kaliningrad could be storing as many as 100 tactical nuclear warheads. Think about that for a second. A landlocked pocket of Russian territory, smaller than many countries you have never heard of, potentially holding enough firepower to devastate an entire region. For decades, Kaliningrad has functioned almost like a loaded gun pointed at the heart of Europe. Iskander missile system stationed there can reach Berlin, Warsaw, and Baltic capitals within minutes. It is a fortress built for one purpose: leverage. As long as Kaliningrad sits there, armed and ready, Russia holds a card it can play anytime tensions rise. But here is where the story shifts. Poland has decided that card is no longer acceptable to leave unanswered. Over the past months, Poland has quietly transformed its eastern border into one of the most fortified frontiers in modern Europe. This is not a wall in the old sense. It is a layered system of concrete barriers, anti-tank obstacles nicknamed Dragon's Teeth, sensor networks, drone surveillance towers, and rapid deployment zones for heavy armor. Engineers have poured hundreds of kilometers of these defenses along the Kaliningrad and Belarus borders under a massive program known as East Shield. The goal is simple to state, but massive in scale. Poland wants to make sure that if Russia ever attempted to punch through the Suwalki Gap, that attempt would fail before it even properly began. Now here is the part that makes this story different from ordinary border tension. Poland is not only building walls, it is actively working to seal Kaliningrad off, not just militarily, but strategically, economically, and logistically. Reports show Poland tightening control over transit routes, watching rail and road corridors that connect Kaliningrad to Belarus, and coordinating closely with NATO allies to monitor every movement in and out of the enclave. Think of Kaliningrad now as an island surrounded not by water, but by steel, sensors, and soldiers. Every road leading in or out passes through territory watched by Poland or Lithuania. Every ship leaving its port sails through waters patrolled by NATO navies. Every plane crossing its airspace is tracked the moment it takes off. This is what people are now calling the Kaliningrad trap. Not because NATO wants a war, quite the opposite. The entire strategy is built around one core idea: make Kaliningrad. So isolated, so watched, and so surrounded that any aggressive move from it becomes almost impossible without instant detection and response. Let's zoom out for a second and understand why this matters so much right now. The Baltic Sea used to be a quiet body of water. Today, it is anything but quiet. 8 out of 9 countries bordering the sea are NATO members. Russia is the only outsider, and its access runs almost entirely through Kaliningrad and through the city of St. Petersburg. That narrow access point is exactly why control of these waters has become so critical. NATO warships now move through the Baltic Sea far more frequently than before. New coastal infrastructure is being built in Latvia, allowing military vessels to load and unload troops and equipment directly from beaches, without needing traditional deep-water ports. Why does that matter? Because a fixed port is an easy target. Missiles from Kaliningrad could destroy a permanent harbor in minutes, but a mobile beach ramp that can appear almost anywhere along the coastline is far harder to hit and far harder to predict. This might sound like a small engineering detail, but it changes the entire balance of power in the region. It means NATO forces can move troops, weapons, and supplies to the front lines within hours instead of days. It means Russia's old strategy of controlling these waters through missile threats alone is losing its edge. Meanwhile, Estonia and Lithuania are racing to match Poland's pace. Estonia has built hundreds of reinforced concrete bunkers along its border with Russia, concentrated heavily around the historic city of Narva, a place where Russian and Estonian territories sit almost close enough to touch. Lithuania has expanded underground shelters and logistics routes to move both civilians and soldiers quickly, if tensions ever spike. Together, these three small nations are building what analysts now call the Baltic defense line, a shared wall of steel, concrete, and technology stretching across their entire eastern frontier. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. If your neighbor kept sharpening a knife on their porch every single day, would you keep ignoring it, or would you start locking your doors? That is essentially the psychology driving every fence, sensor, and bunker being built along this border right now. If you're finding this eye-opening, do me a quick favor, tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this one are unfolding every single week, and you do not want to miss the next chapter. Now let's talk about the northern side of this story, because Poland's move on Kaliningrad is only one piece of a much bigger picture. Finland and Sweden, two countries that stayed neutral for decades, have completely abandoned that neutrality. Finland shares a long border with Russia, and after joining NATO, it effectively doubled the alliance's direct land border with Russian territory overnight. Sweden brought something different to the table, cutting edge. Technology, including small unmanned ground robots developed alongside Ukrainian battlefield engineers, designed to carry supplies and scout dangerous terrain without risking a single soldier's life. Norway has ramped up surveillance near its Arctic waters, watching for increased activity around Russian air bases, known to house long-range strategic bombers. Put simply, from the icy north down through the Baltic Sea to the fortified Suwalki Gap, an entire defensive wall is forming across Russia's northwestern border. It stretches thousands of kilometers, but every country along it is moving in the same direction. Faster defenses, faster deployment, faster response. So why is all of this happening right now? Why this sudden urgency? Part of the answer lies in politics. Recent instability inside Lithuania's government created a moment of uncertainty in the region, and history has shown that Russia often watches closely for exactly these kinds of gaps. Political confusion creates opportunity, and opportunity is something Moscow has exploited before in neighboring countries. NATO's response to this uncertainty has been to double down on deterrence rather than wait and see what happens next. There is also the matter of Russia's shadow fleet, aging tankers used to move goods and skirt international sanctions. These vessels are not just an economic concern. Intelligence agencies believe some of them may be involved in mapping or even threatening undersea cables and pipelines that carry Europe's internet traffic and energy supplies. Mysterious cable cuts and pipeline damage in recent years have only deepened suspicion. So now, alongside land defenses, NATO navies are watching these ships far more closely than ever before. And then there's the missile question, the one that sits underneath every headline about this region. Kaliningrad's Iskander missile systems, combined with similar systems stationed in Belarus, remain on constant alert. These are not just conventional weapons. They are nuclear capable, and Moscow has made no secret of that fact. Putin himself has stated publicly that Russia possesses both nuclear and conventional means to respond to any perceived threat in the Baltic region. That kind of statement is not just political rhetoric. It is a signal aimed directly at the countries building walls along Russia's border. This is exactly why NATO is not only strengthening its ground defenses, but also building a multi-layered air shield over the region. Patriot missile defense batteries and other advanced systems are being deployed across the Baltic states, designed to intercept any missile threat long before it reaches its target. The competition for control is no longer just about tanks and border fences. It has expanded into the skies above these fortified lines. Let's step back in time for a moment, because understanding where Kaliningrad came from helps explain why it matters so much today. Before it was Russian territory, this land was known as Königsberg, part of Germany for centuries. After the Second World War, the Soviet Union took control of the city and its surrounding region as part of the post-war settlement. The German population was expelled, Russian settlers moved in, and the area was transformed into a heavily militarized outpost sealed off from the outside world for decades. Even during the Soviet era, Kaliningrad was treated differently from other Russian regions. Foreigners needed special permission just to visit. It functioned almost like a secret military base disguised as a city. When the Soviet Union collapsed, something strange happened. Lithuania and Poland, the two countries surrounding Kaliningrad, both became independent, and both eventually joined NATO and the European Union. Overnight, Kaliningrad found itself completely cut off from mainland Russia, no longer connected by land through friendly territory, but instead surrounded entirely by nations aligned with the West. For nearly 2 decades, this isolation existed quietly, without much global attention. Trains and trucks moved goods through Lithuania under agreed transit rules, and Kaliningrad functioned as an odd but manageable exclave. That quiet arrangement is exactly what is now unraveled. As tensions rose following Russia's actions in Ukraine, Those transit routes became a point of leverage rather than routine logistics. Lithuania, backed by the European Union, has tightened restrictions on what can move through its territory into Kaliningrad, particularly items under international sanctions. Suddenly, a region that once relied on smooth road and rail access found itself facing real supply challenges, forced to depend more heavily on ships crossing the Baltic Sea, ships that NATO navies now track constantly. Think about what that actually means for daily life inside Kaliningrad. Construction materials, spare parts, even certain consumer goods have to travel further, cost more, and pass through far greater scrutiny than before. A region built around military strength is now struggling with the basic logistics of staying supplied. This is not accidental. It is a direct consequence of the walls, checkpoints, and monitoring systems being built around it. There is also a psychological dimension to all of this that rarely gets discussed. Imagine living in a city where every ship that leaves the harbor is tracked by foreign radar, where every truck crossing the border is inspected under new rules, where soldiers just kilometers away are constantly training for the possibility of conflict. That is daily life for the roughly 500,000 people living in Kaliningrad today. Whatever happens, at the level of governments and generals, ordinary residents are the ones caught living inside a fortress that increasingly feels like a cage. Let's pause here and really think about the scale of what is happening. This is the largest defensive buildup seen in this part of Europe since the Second World War. Hundreds of kilometers of anti-tank barriers, thousands of new bunkers, high-speed rail lines like the new Rail Baltica project, specifically designed to move heavy military equipment from Western Europe to the Eastern Front within hours instead of days. Beach landing ramps replacing vulnerable fixed ports. Robotic ground vehicles reducing the need to risk human soldiers. Air defense systems stacking layer upon layer across the sky. Every single piece of this puzzle points toward one unmistakable conclusion. Poland and its NATO allies are not preparing for a random skirmish. They are preparing for the possibility of a full-scale confrontation while doing everything possible to make sure that confrontation never actually needs to happen. That is the paradox sitting at the heart of this entire story. The stronger this wall becomes, the less likely war becomes, at least according to the logic behind deterrence. But the stronger this wall becomes, the more cornered Kaliningrad feels, sealed off, surrounded, and watched from every direction. And cornered animals do not always behave predictably. Military analysts largely agree that Russia's forces remain heavily stretched by the ongoing war in Ukraine, making an immediate large-scale offensive into the Baltics unlikely in the near term. But unlikely is not the same as impossible, and history has shown that Russia rarely abandons its long-term ambitions. It simply waits for better timing. The current buildup along Kaliningrad's borders is not a temporary reaction. It is a long-term structural shift in how Europe defends itself. It helps to compare this moment to something the world has seen before. During the early 1960s, a small island called Cuba became the center of a standoff that brought two superpowers to the edge of nuclear war, simply because missiles were placed somewhere they were never expected to be. The world held its breath for 13 days. What is happening around Kaliningrad today is different in shape, but strangely similar in weight. A small, heavily armed piece of territory, surrounded by rival forces holding weapons capable of reaching major cities within minutes. The difference this time is that instead of one sudden crisis, we are watching a slow, methodical buildup, month after month, layer after layer, each side calculating exactly how far it can go without triggering the very war both sides claim they want to avoid. That is what makes this story so important to understand right now, rather than after something dramatic happens. Wars rarely begin with a single dramatic moment. They begin with years of positioning, small decisions, quiet construction projects, and shifting alliances that eventually reach a tipping point nobody can fully predict. Every dragon's tooth barrier poured into the Polish soil, every beach ramp built along the Latvian coastline, every underground bunker dug beneath Estonian towns, is a small piece of a much larger picture. Individually, they look like defensive engineering projects. Together, they form the outline of the most significant military transformation Europe has experienced in generations. And this transformation is not confined to soldiers and steel. It is reshaping economies, migration patterns, energy policy, and technology investment across an entire continent. Countries that once spent a small fraction of their budgets on defense are now pouring billions into weapons, radar systems, and fortified infrastructure. Populations that grew up assuming peace was permanent are now being asked to think seriously about worst-case scenarios again. That shift in mindset, quiet and gradual as it may seem, is just as significant as any single military development along the border. Here's something worth remembering as this story continues to unfold. Kaliningrad was originally built as a symbol of Russian strength, a permanent foothold deep inside what is now NATO territory, a reminder that Russian power could reach right into the heart of Europe. Today, That same territory has become something closer to a pressure point, watched constantly, boxed in from every direction, its every movement studied by satellites, radar, and soldiers stationed just kilometers away. The very location that once gave Russia strategic leverage may now be turning into its biggest vulnerability. A fortress that cannot easily reinforce itself, a naval base that cannot move freely through open water without being tracked, a missile stockpile sitting inside a ring of steel that grows tighter with each passing month. So where does this leave us? Poland has made its position unmistakably clear. It is not waiting for permission or approval to defend its border. It is building, fortifying, and coordinating with unprecedented speed. Kaliningrad, once a symbol of unchallenged. Russian reach now sits boxed in, watched, and increasingly isolated, right in the middle of a rapidly transforming European security landscape. The next move belongs to Moscow. Will Russia accept this new reality and adjust quietly, or will it look for a way to break out of a trap that keeps closing tighter with every passing month? Nobody outside the Kremlin knows the answer, and that uncertainty alone is why the entire world is watching this small piece of land more closely than almost anywhere else on Earth. If you made it this far, you clearly care about understanding what is really happening in the world, not just the headlines. So here's my final ask. Like this video if it gave you real clarity, subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this one, and drop a comment telling me what you think happens next. Do you believe Russia backs down, or do you think Kaliningrad becomes the spark for something much bigger? I will be reading every single comment, so let's talk about it down below.